Back to my roadkill image. I'm going to talk now about a little bit more in depth about the Magic Wand tool. I mentioned it briefly before, and these three other selection tools. So the Magic Wand tool I talked about as using it as a fast way to be able to select a white background and inverse it. And let's talk about how it actually changes when you change the tolerance. So remember I had mentioned this tolerance field up here. So I'm going to drop my tolerance to 30 because that's the sort of standard number it's on. And I'm going to keep clicking into the sky, and I'm going to try to always hit about the same spot so you can see when I adjust the tolerance how it takes more or less of the sky. So I'm clicking right there in the middle, and at a tolerance of 30 you can see the range of pixels it takes. So it's not just taking the pixels of the same color exactly where I clicked, but it has like a tolerance. It takes like a little bit of darker and a little bit brighter color tones to where I clicked. I'm going to undo that. So if you ever want to get rid of a selection, the keyboard shortcut is Control D. Or you could go up to Select and choose Deselect. I'll do that next time. I'm going to lower the tolerance to 10 and go into about the same spot. And you can see it's now taking a more narrow range of colors, so I have just a small selection. So I'll go up to Select, and you can see the option is Deselect or Control D. Alright, so let's move this up. I was at 30. Let's move it up to 40, and again I'm going to try to hit in about the same spot. And you can see how it's now moving up further. It's taking more of the darker region. Do Control D, get rid of that. Let's move it up to 50, hit about the same region. Still haven't taken it all. It's going closer to the top, but not there. Let's move my tolerance up to 60 and go right up here. Okay, so I'm pretty close. At this point, I'd like to point out on the options bar, you also have these different modes that you can have any of your selection tools. By default, you are in this create new selection mode, which means that's the first one there, which means if I click again, it gets rid of my old selection and gives me a new selection. I'm going to undo that, Control D, and click back up in here. Actually, I want to get about where I was before, where I didn't have quite everything. The next mode is it allows me to add on to my selection. So I pretty much got it, but now if I click up in here, I'm going to be adding on to that old selection. So I joined my new selection with my old one. And if I went too far, let's say I clicked into here and I thought, okay, I'm going to select the book as well, and then I changed my mind, I could switch to the last mode, which is subtract from. So now what I click on is being removed from my current selection. Oh, I have kind of a few things here. All right. And the last mode is just very weird, the intersecting. That's easier to demonstrate on using like the ellipse or rectangle, so I'll come back to that. But honestly, it's not a mode that you'll probably ever use. Okay, so I am going to, now let's talk about something else we could do with our selection. So in the last time, we talked about using it to copy and paste. So also, and this is something now you're going to say, why didn't I know this for my first practice of the painted assignment? Well, can't do everything at once. I have a selection, and now if I took my paint tool, and I'm going to get a kind of cyan color, that's fine. I'll click here. I like that color. Click OK. And now when I paint, I can make my brush really large. The paint will only happen inside my selections. That's pretty cool. But here's the thing, I did just do that on my background, which is destructive, and I don't want you to work like that. So I'm going to undo that, and my selection's still there. I'm going to create a new layer and paint. So I'm painting on the new layer even though the selection is on my background. All right, and if you're not sure about that, you can just come over here, click on the eyeball, and you can see my original layer, which has not been damaged. Okay, another thing I could do is I could apply an effect like we had gone to, oh, sorry, I can't do that if that is blacked out. So I'm going to go back onto this layer, turn that one off. My selection's still active, and I could apply an adjustment like the black and the white, or I'm just going to try color balance. And this is only going to apply to the area that is selected. So I could change the color balance this way as well, and you see how it's only applying to what's going on in there. Okay, so that's Magic Wand tools and thinking about some other things that we can do besides just copying and pasting with our selection. Now moving on to this image, frame within a frame. Let's talk about this tool, the Quick Selection tool. So this tool works by clicking and dragging, and what Photoshop is doing as I click and drag is it's trying to find the edge of the object I'm tracing, which is pretty cool. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to go over here. I'm actually going to try to get a little bit more than I want. Alright, so moving down here, making too good a selection. I want to make an error here so I can show you again how we can switch modes. Okay, so that's a good selection, but you see how it took a little bit of my background here? Not a problem. I'm going to switch to the mode of subtracting, and now I'm going to select my sky and get it to subtract this from my selection. So I only want the outside part selected. So I don't want to see these little marching ants in the sky, so it's just these columns on the outside. And then I could do all kinds of things. I could copy this and paste it somewhere else. I could paint over it. I could apply one of these different adjustments. So I'll do let's look at the photo filter one. Try that one so far. So something that's just warming. I'll choose a cooling filter. So, it can apply some kind of effect. And again, the cool thing is it's happening just to the inside of my selections, not anywhere else. And now let's say I wanted to start editing and doing something here. I need to deselect, so that is Control D. Okay, and then another tool that's relatively new over here is called the Object Selection tool. So with this one, you're going to make a selection over an object, and then Photoshop is going to do its best to try to make that selection for you. So here I go. I make a big selection over this object, and wait a second, and now you see how it shrinks down. I have the marching ants on that selection. And I'm just going to do Control J. So I pasted that selection onto a new layer. You can't really tell because the background's still there. I'm going to turn off the background, and now you can see how it is white. So sometimes when I am, or transparent, sorry. Sometimes when I'm checking your selections, and if your background's transparent, I actually will add a layer, and I'll put it below, and I'll fill it with a color, any color, Alt Backspace, keyboard shortcut, so that I can look at the edges of your selections, just to let you know. Now, one thing you may have noticed is it did a pretty good job with the selections, but it did take a little bit of the background right here in between. So I am going to go back to that stage, just went back in my history panel to the stage where I left off before I copied and pasted it. And actually I see it didn't take all of this here. So what I want to point out is just because I started with one selection tool doesn't mean I have to stop with it. I have the active selection from this object selection tool, but now I could switch over to the quick selection tool, make sure I'm in the right mode. Do I want to add to or take away? I want to take away right here. I'm in the take away mode, and I'm going to click into the background and have Photoshop take that away from my selection. Okay, so it's now not taking that background, but I need to add in this little bit right here. So I switch the mode, and now I add it over. Okay, so now I'll do the same thing, Control J, which just duplicates. We did that before to duplicate a layer, but now I used it to duplicate a selection, turn off the background, and now you can see that it really cleaned that up. Okay, so just because you start with one selection doesn't mean you're stuck with it. While that selection is active, you could always switch to another one. And remember to go up here, you can switch the modes. And also remember some of these, like the Magic Wand tool, work, which I'm trying to get back to here, work with other features in the options bar, such as the tolerance field. So that's all for this video. And you won't be using all of these selection techniques for this upcoming project, but you will be using them throughout the semester.